sponsored by Skillshare.
Hi guys, it's Claire, welcome back. Today I am coming at you with a somewhat unusual video for this channel, and that is a book haul. I think I've done a total of maybe like 4 book hauls ever on this channel, and I think the last one I did was probably like 2.5 years ago. And that's just because I'm normally not really in the habit of acquiring a ton of books on a regular basis. However, since the onset of COVID and quarantine and social distancing protocols back in March, I have found myself buying books at record levels for me personally, in lieu, I guess, of any form of social activity or public transportation or the kinds of things that I would normally be spending money on. And so over the past few months, I have found myself having far fewer qualms than I normally would about just buying books. And I have been super lucky and fortunate to have been steadily employed throughout the pandemic, and I do think that if you have the means to, supporting authors and local indie bookstores is a really great thing. And I was actually staying with my parents in Wisconsin for a while and just got back to my apartment in New York and thought it might be a fun time to do a little quarantine book haul, and also thought I would mention some of the independent bookstores that I have gotten them from. Although several of these I did order through bookshop.org, which I have to say has been an Amazon alternative godsend the past few months. And some of these books you may have seen because I've already read them and wrapped them up, or because I also have a habit of reading books out of the library or on NetGalley first, and then getting a physical copy later on down the road if I really loved it. So there are a few of those thrown in here as well. The first book I bought during quarantine way back in March was appropriately You Never Forget Your First by Alexis, a very listicle heavy biography of George Washington. I ordered this from A Room of One's Own, which is a great independent bookstore in Madison, Wisconsin, and to be totally honest, despite the fun cover, it was just fine, like pretty average, not super substantial. So I now kind of wish that I didn't own like a hardcover copy of this particular book, but what can you do? But I also ordered a copy of The Sorrow of War, a novel of North Vietnam by Bao Ninh from A Room of One's Own. This is a novel about a North Vietnamese soldier during what we Americans know as the Vietnam War. I read this book a couple of years ago and reviewed it alongside The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which I'll link down below. But yeah, it's just phenomenal and unforgettable, and honestly probably like one of the best books I've ever read, like an all-time greatest read. Kind of in that vein, I also picked up a copy of Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War by Viet Nguyen. And I've tried reading this book a couple of times out of the library, but have never really made it super far before it's been due back. So I thought I would just get a copy of this because it's also probably the kind of book that I'll want to annotate and take a lot of notes in. So yeah, I'm actually super interested in this book and have like wanted to get into it many a time. So hopefully it's something that I'll get into and finally finish in full sometime soon. Somewhat adjacently, when I read The Sorrow of War and the Things They Carried, I also read a book called Bloods, which is an oral history of Black soldiers in the Vietnam War, edited by Wallace Terry, which I highly recommend and which was apparently required reading for the actors on the set of The Five Bloods, which is the new Spike Lee Netflix movie that came out earlier this summer. And around that time, The Ringer did a piece about Bloods, the book, and Wallace Terry, and it was from that piece that I learned that he had actually written another oral history called Missing Pages, Black Journalists of Modern America. So I picked up a copy of this and actually read the first entry in it when I first got it, and it was fascinating. So I am looking forward to circling back to the rest of it at some point. And then back in May, I was in Spring Green, Wisconsin for a day and stopped at Arcadia Books, which is a wonderful little independent bookstore that was open for super limited browsing. And for reasons that I can't fully recall right now, I picked up a copy of Annals of the Former World by John McPhee, which I think is a book about like North American geology. I also picked up a copy of The Path to Power by Robert Caro. This is the first book in his Lyndon B. Johnson epic biography. One of my friends is super into these books and I think was tweeting about it late one night, and I was inspired to get a copy. And I also got a copy of Underland, A Deep Time Journey by Robert Macfarlane. When will I read any of these testosterone-heavy epics? Who's to say? Maybe someday. Earlier this summer, I also impulse bought a copy of Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey by Homer, which I've talked about a couple of times on this channel already. I loved it, and it also sent me down a kind of Homer ancient classics spiral, and so I also picked up copies of the Robert Fagles translation of the Iliad by Homer and the Robert Fagles translation of the Aeneid by Virgil. It also prompted me to pick up a couple of different Homer inspired books, the first being The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I actually listened to on audio and really enjoyed and then wanted to get a copy of. I got the UK edition of this one because the US cover is visually offensive to me. I also got 50 Days at ILIAM by Twombly, which is a beautiful coffee table book about his art installation inspired by the Iliad. In June, I also got myself a copy of Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine, which I had originally read as a library ebook. I do recommend the physical book over the ebook for this one, just because it is so visual, and at least on my Kindle, the pictures don't really come across that well. And I did do a full review of this one that I'll link down below as well. Another book that I read as a library book but then wanted a physical copy of is A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, which is her very famous 1959 play, and I loved it, and it prompted me to also pick up a copy of To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, which is an, in her own words, kind of posthumous autobiography about Lorraine Hansberry. And I also got a copy of Looking for Lorraine, which is Imani Perry's recent biography of Lorraine Hansberry. Then I ordered a handful of books from the Lit Bar, which is a Black-owned bookstore in the Bronx. The first being Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, which is his history of racist ideas in America. I also got a copy of Visible Man, which is a biography of Henry Dumas by Jeffrey B. Leake. Henry Dumas was a Black writer and poet in the 1960s. Toni Morrison was a real champion of his work, so I was interested in learning more about him and kind of exploring some of his writings later this year. I also got a copy of Lot by Bryan Washington, which is an excellent collection of short stories that I loved and reviewed recently alongside Luster and Exciting Times, so I'll link that down below. I also got a copy of Savage Conversations by Leanne Howe, which is a phenomenal play that I read out of the library earlier this year and wanted to get a copy of. And the last book that I got from the Lit Bar was Sansei and Sensibility by Karente Yamashita, which is a collection of short stories that are modern updates on classic tales, including some Jane Austen novels. After I mentioned Savage Conversations by Leanne Howe in my mid-year freakout tag, Alex from Big Al Books highly recommended Shell Shaker, which is a novel by Leanne Howe that she recently talked about in a kind of mega wrap-up of Indigenous literature that I'll link down below. Alex has phenomenal taste, so I'm looking forward to getting into this one soon. And I also picked up a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this is a book that was published several years ago, but has recently been appearing on the New York Times bestseller list, which has been great to see. And I ordered both of these books from Birch Bark Books in Minneapolis, which is owned by Louise Erdrich. This summer, I also picked up copies of Passing by Nella Larson and Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which are two Black American classics that I want to get to later this year. Switching gears slightly, I am also in the process of working on a video about the romance genre, which has long fascinated me, and so I picked up a copy of Reading the Romance, Women, Patriarchy, and Popular Literature by Janice A. Radway, and this is a super academic look at romance books, romance readers, and the activity of reading romance. And it was published in 1984, so it's quite dated in a lot of ways, but it was also just like fascinating on so many levels. So I'll talk about this one in greater depth at a later date. But I've been reading a number of romances lately, including The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. And I first heard Mariana Zapata mentioned by Deboki over on her channel Okie Dokie Boki, and I have a lot of thoughts about this book. It obviously has a heinous cover and a heinous title, and it is like inexplicably almost 600 pages long, albeit with like size 14 font. And yet, despite all of that, I like super enjoyed this book, so I will be talking more about this one later as well. And I also finally ordered myself a copy of Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which is still probably my favorite romance of all time, so it's nice to finally have a copy of this one. And then I was back at Arcadia Books in Spring Green a few weeks ago and picked up a copy of Luster by Raven Leilani and Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, both of which I had read on NetGalley and then wanted hard copies of. And as I mentioned, I reviewed both of these together with Lot a few weeks ago, so I will link that down below. While I was there, I also picked up Tokyo Ueno Station by Yu Miri, which is a novel about the ghost or spirit of a homeless man in Tokyo's Ueno Park. And I read this one for Women in Translation Month this year. And then the last book that I got at Arcadia Books was a complete impulse purchase, and that is the Penguin Book of Japanese Short Stories. And this is a book that I've gotten out from the library before, but not been able to make my whole way through. So I saw it and was like, let's get a copy. And honestly, that's kind of the thing I miss most about being able to go browse in bookstores, is just going in and then coming out with something that you didn't expect to find. It's just kind of hard to replicate that experience with online shopping. So looking forward to a day when we can all kind of safely do that again on the regs. And last but certainly not least, I picked up a copy of The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante, which I went to go get on release day on September 1st at Books and Company in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, which is something that I don't think I've done since like the days of Harry Potter midnight releases. Obviously very excited about this one and looking forward to getting to it soon. Before I head out, I wanted to mention that this video is kindly sponsored by Skillshare. As you probably know, Skillshare is an amazing online learning platform with thousands of classes for people who are interested in discovering new skills, finding a new hobby, or exploring their creativity and various passions. I recently took Skillshare's interior design, interior decorate like a boss class taught by a woman named Rose Sprinkle, which was great because I have been trying to make my apartment kind of as nice and cozy as possible since I've been back. And what I really liked and found fascinating about this class was the way it got into the real like specifics of things like contrast and scale and alignment and color theory. It really kind of broke down the specifics of why certain things look good and what makes things visually appealing, which was super fascinating, especially because I feel like when I kind of set stuff up, it's mostly going on my own like hit and miss gut instinct. Skillshare classes are a super affordable way to learn online with annual premium membership coming in at less than $10 a month. Classes are also designed to fit your busy schedule and to connect you with other online learners through Skillshare's huge community of other creative and curious people. So if you're interested in exploring your creativity through Skillshare, you can use the link in the description box to get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Those are all of the books that I have acquired these past 6 months during quarantine. Thank you for joining me on this very consumerist journey, but also support your local indies if you're able to. If you have any favorite indie bookstores that you have been ordering books from that you want to give a shout out to down in the comments below, please do so. And I will also leave links to all of the bookstores that I mentioned here if you want to go check them out for yourself. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!